In this thought-provoking video, we delve into 6 very real threats to democracy that continue to loom large despite recent electoral victories against election deniers in some key states. From growing political polarization to the spread of disinformation and the rise of authoritarianism, these challenges pose significant risks to the future of democracy. Tune in to learn more about these critical issues and what can be done to protect and strengthen our democratic institutions. One of the biggest concerns heading into November's midterm elections had been the possibility that election deniers would sweep statewide offices that oversee elections in key battleground states. Another was that they would refuse to concede once they lost. Those concerns were given a reprieve due to surprising wins by Democrats nationwide, in races from the U.S. Senate down to state and local offices. American democracy is in a weakened state. Among its ailments, a segment of the public enthralled to the big lie that Trump won the 2020 election, social media platforms that peddle misinformation and gerrymandering that polarizes state politics. Along with those threats, 2 looming U.S. Supreme Court cases could further imperil voting rights and make the country even more vulnerable to the politically motivated overturning of presidential elections. There are still some really blaring alarm bells, some really disturbing attacks on democracy and the rule of law happening all over the place. These are some of the causes for alarm. 1. An election system that can be subverted. Recent refusals by election boards to certify the votes in Cochise County, Arizona, and Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, may be outliers. But local officials declining to perform a function that is purely ministerial does expose a weakness that those seeking to undermine a fragmented election system can exploit. We have a very decentralized election system. There are many pressure points where we rely on people to act in good faith. And if they don't, we don't always have a good way of dealing with that, UCLA law professor and election law expert Richard Hassan said. The defeat of election-denying candidates in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and other states has made that much less likely, says Daniel Squadron, director of the States Project, a Democratic-aligned group that focuses on turning legislatures blue. The Electoral Count Reform Act, crafted in response to the fake elector scheme hatched by Trump supporters in 2020, would make it harder for rogue actors to try to override the popular vote for president in their states by sending alternate slates of electors or declaring a failed election. It would also limit the ability of U.S. senators and representatives to challenge slates chosen by voters, and clarify that the vice president has no power to determine who won the electoral vote. 2. A media ecosystem that breeds disinformation and mistrust in elections. Arizona election officials overwhelmed by false allegations of fraud. Election officials swamped with Public Record Act requests demanding that they debunk election myths. 1 in 5 election workers saying they are unlikely to remain in their position through the next presidential election. These were the kinds of reports that have emerged since 2020 and that worried observers heading into the midterms. Disinformation, false information spread deliberately, can cause confusion, or even lead to violence as it did on January 6, 2021. Social media messages included "hunt him down" and "hang him when convicted for fraud until maggots drip from his mouth." 3. Concerted attempts to undermine the voting process. Of course, election-related disinformation is promoted by politicians and right-wing agitators. Wilson's organization has been keeping a watchful eye on efforts to recruit election deniers as volunteer poll workers. Volunteer poll workers actually participate in running elections. They process ballots, check IDs, and help voters. Misinformed volunteer poll worker or one with less than good intentions could report false information that catches fire and causes untrue information to become disinformation on social media. 4. Gerrymandering leading to partisan minority rule. A perhaps underappreciated contributor to extremism is the persistence of partisan gerrymandering by state legislatures, says Pepper, the former Ohio Democratic Party chair. His home state of Ohio is a poster child for politicians who fashion districts to create partisan advantage. Tactic used and abused by both political parties, but Ohio's Republican-led legislature has defied repeated court orders to draw districts that comply with the state's constitution. The result, a state with a 54-46 partisan split over the last decade has a Republican supermajority in both chambers of its state house. It's a similar story in Wisconsin and other states. Importantly, says Pepper, it leads to an unrepresentative government and legislation that caters to the most extreme members of the governing party. 5. Laws that limit who votes. Since the beginning of 2021, lawmakers have passed at least 42 restrictive voting laws in 21 states. Those who support such restrictions say they safeguard elections from fraud. But studies have shown that voter fraud is vanishingly rare, and voter suppression disproportionately harms minority and young voters. Georgia's Senate Bill 2 led to a racial discrimination lawsuit from the U.S. Department of Justice for unfairly targeting black voters. Still, voting rights activists have sometimes been able to counteract suppression efforts with voter mobilization, leading to an uneasy draw. 6. Upcoming Supreme Court rulings that could upend elections. This week, the U.S. Supreme Court is scheduled to hear oral arguments in Moore v. Harper, the case that has advocates most on edge. The case concerns the independent state legislative theory, which Trump's allies unsuccessfully invoked to justify his effort to steal the election in 2020. If it is validated, it could give increasingly extremist legislatures unchecked power to create the rules that govern elections. The case originates in Alabama, where the mostly white legislature drew just 1 out of 7 congressional districts in which black voters made up a majority. Even though black people make up 27% of the voting age population in the state. On October 4, the Supreme Court voted 5-4 along ideological lines to temporarily block the lower court's ruling and is expected to rule on the case this term. This will be a rather consequential Supreme Court term in terms of the future of American democracy. Thank you for watching this video on the 6 very real threats to democracy. We hope that it has provided you with valuable insights into the challenges facing our democratic systems today. As citizens, it is up to all of us to remain vigilant and engaged, to stand up for the principles that underpin our democracies, and to work together to safeguard them for future generations. If you found this video informative, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel for more content like this in the future.